Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. In my reading roundup videos, I talk about the books that I have been reading recently, and I had to take a few back to the library, so I'm going to insert a clip in here of me talking about those 5 books. I have 5 library books to talk about right now. I need to take these back to the library. They are overdue and I'm feeling bad, so I am going to put this clip in at the beginning of my regular reading roundup video. So I read The Stolen Letter by Paige Shelton. This is part of her Scottish Bookshop mystery series, and I think this is the 5th maybe in that series. Yes, it's the 5th in the series. It came out in 2020, so it's not the most recent one though, because I believe one came out in 2021. But this is about an American woman who goes over to Scotland. Her name is Delaney Nichols, and she gets a job at a bookshop in Edinburgh. And what's interesting though is that she doesn't just get a job working in the bookshop. Her job is actually curator of a collection that the bookshop owner owns. He also has a warehouse attached to the bookshop, and his collection does include books, but it also includes many other things as well. Interesting historical things, antiques, and stuff like that. So that's her job, and so I think that's what makes the series interesting. I love that it's set in Scotland. I love that it's set in a bookshop, but having her curate this collection kind of adds another interesting level to the stories. So she is going to work, and she bumps into this woman who is also heading for the bookshop. And what surprises them is that they look very much alike, and they've never met before. They end up going to the bookshop, and this woman has some books that she wants the people in the bookshop to look at and see if they'll buy. And so it's just this bizarre coincidence, or is it, of these 2 women meeting who look very similar. And then Delaney finds out that the council, the city council, is going to have a vote about whether to shut down the bookshop, and it's something related to, oh, there was an inspection and the building's not up to code or something like that. But all of it seems very shady. They don't remember an inspection happening. They don't have a letter. They didn't hear anything from the council, and then all of a sudden there's this vote coming up. So all of it seems very shady. And then one of the men on the council gets killed. And so, of course, the police are looking into it, and they're looking into, you know, people who work at the bookshop because they potentially had a motive. So yeah, it was pretty good. I do enjoy this series. I would definitely call it a cozy series. And so yeah, that's my latest in the Scottish Bookshop series. And then I read The Merchant's House by Kate Ellis. This is the first in her Wesley Peterson series. You may have seen this book in my Try a Chapter videos, and I really enjoyed this series, or this book, and I'm not sure why I've never read this series before, because this book came out in the 90s, so I have no excuses. Yes, this came out in 1998, and so I'm not entirely sure why I've never read this before, because this ticks a lot of boxes for me. It's set in England, specifically in Devon. And there are archaeological connections, which I love. And so I really enjoyed this book, and I am definitely going to be continuing with this series. So Detective Sergeant Wesley Peterson has recently moved to Tradmouth in the West Country, and a child has gone missing, and then there is also a woman who was murdered. Now, the woman who was murdered is the case that he is working on, but someone else in the police station is working on the missing child case. He comes across a friend of his who is an archaeologist, Neil, and Neil has been given like 6 weeks to do a dig at a place where they're planning to build a mall or something. And he realizes that they've got like an ancient, like not an ancient, a merchant's house from about the 1600s, and so they're very excited. But while they're there, they also dig up the skeleton of a young woman who, once they look at the bones, they realize that she was murdered, and they also dig up the bones of a baby. And so, you know, he's looking at that while D.S. Peterson is investigating his case. And it was great. I really liked it. I really liked her writing style. It was a good mystery, and I definitely want to continue with this series. And then I also was continuing in my read of the Inspector Singh series by Shamini Flint. I really enjoy this series. This is a series set in modern day in Asia. Inspector Singh works for the Singapore police force, but in these books he gets sent to a variety of places to investigate. In this one, A Curious Indian Cadaver, he actually goes to India with his wife for a family wedding. They are Indian people. He is a Sikh, and they had moved a while ago to Singapore. Anyway, they go back to India for a family wedding, and so that was great. I enjoyed that setting of India, and they go to Mumbai, and the bride-to-be disappears just a few days before her wedding. So I enjoyed this one in the series because Inspector Singh isn't actually on a case, he is on holiday, but he gets asked to investigate to see if he can find the bride before her wedding, because the family just doesn't want it getting out. And so yeah, again, this was a great book in the series. I really enjoy this series. I like Inspector Singh. He's a great detective, and I like the characters, and the mysteries are always really good, and I enjoy that each book takes place in a different country, and so I find that really interesting too. And then I read 13. This was next up in the Eddie Flynn series by Steve Cavanagh. I love this series. It is so good. And what I find so interesting is this book in particular is a booktube baby. You hear about this book a lot, and from a lot of people who have never read the rest of the series, they've only read this book. They may not even have known that it was part of a series, and that is so unfortunate because this series as a whole is so good, and the character of Eddie Flynn is fascinating. So he used to be a con man, he is now a lawyer, and this is the fourth book in the series. And Eddie Flynn gets asked to help to come on board the team of lawyers that is defending a movie star who has been charged with killing his wife and his bodyguard. And so Eddie Flynn joins the team, but then of course things are never as they seem, which happens all the time in Steve Cavanagh's books. Famously, because it's right on the cover, the serial killer isn't on trial, he's on the jury. So the whole book, I was trying to figure out what was his end game there. Why would a serial killer want to be on the jury? And it was so good. It's such a good ride. They're so fast-paced and action-packed, and you can, at least I can't, I can never figure out where the story is actually going. They're so good. I can't recommend this series enough. If you really enjoy courtroom dramas, then this is a great series, because they're very action-packed, but so much of the story does take place in a courtroom, and so they're really fascinating that way. I also really enjoy, he manages to just start his stories with a bang, and he often has really great first sentences. So this is from the prologue. At 5:10 on a raw December afternoon, Joshua Kane lay on a cardboard bed outside the criminal courts building in Manhattan and thought about killing a man. So yeah, I highly recommend 13, but I highly recommend the series as a whole. They are really entertaining, and I can't wait to get to the next one in the series. And then I also read The Reader's Room by Antoine Laurain. You will have seen this one in my recent Try Chapter video series as well. This is a translated book set in Paris. This has been translated from the French by Jane Aiken, Emily Boyce, and Polly McIntosh. This is also a fairly recent publication. It came out in 2020 and it was also translated into English in 2020. So this is a book in Paris set at a publishing house, specifically in the reader's room of that publishing house. So these are the people who read manuscripts that come in, and our main character is Violaine, and she has just published a book that she's very excited about, but she has never met the author. She doesn't know who the author is. And then the police show up because people have been murdered in exactly the way the book describes. So I thought that was interesting. This one was only okay for me because it ended up, it's not exactly the kind of mystery that I really enjoy. It was well written and interesting, but not really the kind of mystery that I like. Another thing that I found it slightly confusing because it's a non-linear story, and so I sometimes had problems figuring out where I was in the timeline of the story. Also there was, I don't know if I want to say magical realism. I don't think that that's quite right. But like the murders mimicking the book, that's not exactly accurate either, but I don't want to give any more information. I don't want to give any spoilers in case you do want to read this book. It's a short little book. It's less than 200 pages. But yeah, so if you want to try a translated mystery, this is a good option. It's set in Paris, and it was well written and engaging, but maybe just not quite exactly the mystery that I was looking for from it. But I did like that it was set in the world of publishing. I thought that was really interesting. These are 5 books that I have read recently. I'm happy. I'm happy with all of them. As a treat, I am drinking this raspberry Coca-Cola, which is very tasty, I have to say. And not just raspberry, but British Columbia raspberries. And so, go Canada. All right. I read The Devil in the Marshalsea by Antonia Hodgson. Hodgson. Sorry. The minute I looked at it, I thought I'm going to have problems saying that name, and I don't know why, because it's not that unusual. Antonia Hodgson. Now, you will recognize this book if you watched my Try a Chapter videos. I read the first chapter of this and really enjoyed it, and thought I'm going to keep going with this book, and I'm glad that I did. This was a really interesting read. I really enjoyed it. It's historical mystery set in London in 1727, and it's set in the Marshalsea, the debtor's prison. And it was great. It was a great setting for a mystery. There is a very reluctant amateur sleuth that is investigating, and I'll get into that in a minute. But first, I really liked that in the beginning, the author included a historical note that it is set in 1727, and so it is not the same prison that Dickens uses as a setting in A Little Dorrit. It's the second jail opened. That one was the second jail opened at the turn of the 1800s and was even situated further down the Borough High Street. So there was other interesting information in this historical note that I really appreciated. One was that she talks about swearing, because I made a note of this, that there is that there is some language in this book, but she talks about that they did an awful lot of swearing, and all the words used in this book are words that were used at the time. So this is something that I really appreciate in historical fiction, is when the author does their homework, when they do their research. So yeah, I appreciated that. It's so our main character is Tom Hawkins, and he gets put in the Marshalsea at the beginning of this book because he is in debt and he cannot pay it. Once there, he finds out that a man had been killed in the prison a few months before, and it was obvious that he had been killed, but it had been like put out that he had committed suicide. And his wife is still there. She has stayed in the prison. She is living there to try and force people into looking into what happened to her husband. She wants to know what happened. And so our main character, Tom, he finds out that if he figures out what happened to her husband, he'll get out of jail. And it's a little more complicated than that, but I don't want to go into all the details. So we have our reluctant amateur sleuth. I thought that it was the description of the prison and how it worked and what it was like and who was in there was really, really interesting. She describes there's a tap room in there, and which is like a bar basically, a coffee house, a chop house, and I thought that was fascinating. Like I don't know, like I still have kind of maybe more modern day prisons in my mind, but like all these places were run by prisoners, which is brilliant actually, because they need to make money, and people in the prison need to eat and they want to drink, and so yeah, so I just thought that was really interesting. The other interesting thing was that like you had to pay for absolutely everything in this prison, which is a tad ironic. If prisoners are in there because they are in debt, they don't have any money, but you have to pay for everything. You have to pay for food, you have to pay rent for the room that you sleep in, you have to pay for your blankets. You really do have to pay for absolutely everything. So that was really interesting too. One note, this book is very gritty, it's very grim, which makes sense because it's set in a debtor's prison, but just a note there that that it is pretty grim. It's very, very gritty. I liked, there was also a note at the end of the book that talked about real people that appeared in this story, which I thought was really interesting too, and way more than I thought were real people. So I thought that was really cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was really well written, well researched, and I would definitely read more by this author. And then I read A Very Pukka Murder by Arjun Raj Gayand. This is a historical mystery set in India in 1909. So this is the Edwardian time period. What made this mystery really interesting is that it was a British resident who was murdered, but it's set in the princely state of Rajpur, and the Maharaja is the one who is investigating. So of course there is a British investigator on the case, but this Maharaja really loves mysteries, and so he gets himself involved. So he's the one investigating a British victim, which I thought was a really interesting part of the story. This was a locked room mystery, which was really fun. He has a bodyguard named Singh, who is nearly 7 feet tall. His bodyguard / manservant. He was a great character. Oh, and also, spoiler alert, if you have not yet read The Yellow Room Mystery, The Mystery of the Yellow Room by Gaston Leroux, this book completely spoils that, so spoiler alert for that. Although, I mean, there have been worse books spoiled in modern mysteries. I mean, that one was written in the 1800s, so, you know, But if you hadn't read it, then and you see the that author's name or the name of the book, maybe just skip that paragraph because they full on spoil that mystery. This one also ended with a gathering of the suspects, so it was a very traditional mystery that way. It felt very Agatha Christie, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the main character Sikander was a really interesting. He was a really interesting character because he was a Maharaja. He is wealthy. He is bored. He loves to investigate, and yet he is the Maharaja in a princely state under British rule. And so because the victim is British, he had to go to a lot of British places. And despite the fact that he was a prince, he was still very much looked down on by the British people. And so that part was really interesting. There was a good definition of what Puka means in here. And so I thought I would read that because I was not entirely sure myself. Let's see. The word Pukka was a very interesting one, uniquely Anglo-Indian in origin, but with myriad vague meanings that depended entirely on the context in which it was used. In a positive sense, it could mean anything from reliable or trustworthy to admirable, but when used negatively, it suggested that someone or something was not quite legitimate or acceptable. So yeah, I thought that was good. So there you have it, a very Pukka murder. By Arjun Raj Gand, and this is a trilogy, and I am definitely going to read the rest of them. And then we have The Mausoleum by David Mark. This is also a historical mystery. This one is set in the very north of England in 1967. And this one's interesting. I couldn't figure out really what I thought about this book at the end. I ended up giving it a 3 because I liked the story, but I didn't love it. And the writing was kind of, yeah. So, for example, there was a lot of similes and metaphors. And I don't mind some use of similes and metaphors, but there was just a lot. Some paragraphs, there would be like 3 or 4 or 5 in a small paragraph. And I don't know if it's just me but I always think that that's too much. Anyways, so this is set in a town that straddles Cumbria and Northumberland in the north of England, and this woman who has recently lost her baby is in the graveyard, and she sees a storm is about to hit, like a massive rainstorm, thunder and lightning and everything, and she sees a body. So lightning strikes this tree, it breaks apart into a mausoleum, and she sees a body that doesn't fit because it's too well preserved. And so she goes for protection from the storm, and when they go back to the graveyard later, that body is gone. There is a lot about World War II in this story. There is, near the town, there was a POW camp during the war, and then a lot of people, of course, in the village had, relatives or even themselves that fought in the war. And so the consequences of that and what people did in the war played a big part in this story. So I did enjoy the story, and I did really enjoy the 2 main characters, Felicity and Cordelia. But like I said, there was just something about the writing that was kind of just for me. And then this was a reread, Murder at the Mena House by Erica Ruth Neubauer. And I reread this because the next one in the series is coming out, and I wanted to refresh my memory. This is a book that takes place in Egypt in 1926. Our main character is Jane. She is an American widow who is on a vacation in Egypt with her aunt, and they are staying at the Mena House Hotel. And while there, another guest at the hotel is found murdered, and she starts to look into it because she is under suspicion herself from the police. I really liked the character of Jane. She was a really interesting character. The other characters in the book were really fun too. This was just a really fun historical mystery. I like the setting of Egypt, and I'm looking forward to the next one in the series. Oh, I actually, one thing that I did really love is there's a few scenes where she talks about grabbing the book that she's reading and going down by the pool, and the book that she's reading is The Man in the Brown Suit by Agatha Christie. So I fully approve of that. And then I read Servant of Death by Sarah Hawkswood. This is another one that you may recognize from my Try a Chapter tag. This is a historical mystery series. This is the first one, set in 1143. So this is during the time when we have King Stephen and Empress Maud fighting it out for who is the true ruler in England. And this is set in an abbey, Pershore Abbey. And the Lord Bishop of Winchester, his clerk, Udo, gets killed at the abbey. And Braidcoat and Catchpool have to investigate and find out who the killer is. This was also really good. I liked the beginning. So the first couple chapters, you meet basically the suspects, and you learn just a little bit about them, and then you get the murder, and then you get the investigation. And so I like that. In that sense, it's kind of a very traditional mystery, but of course this is set in 1143, so it's medieval time period. A lot of really interesting things related to that. It's set in an abbey, which was also really interesting. So you've got like the people at the abbey, the monks and the abbot, but then you also get these two from the sheriff that are investigating, and then a lot of the suspects are actually visitors to the abbey. There's a couple of nuns from a different abbey, and various other people who are staying there on their way to somewhere else possibly, or whatever. There's a mason who is there with his apprentices doing work on the abbey. So it's a really interesting collection of people, and I did really enjoy this one, and I would definitely continue in the series. And then last but not least, I read All the Devils Are Here by Louise Penny. This is her Armand Gamache from 2020. And I loved it. Some people I see, when I see reviews, talk about getting bored with Armand Gamache, but I just don't. I love him as a character. I think he is so fascinating. He is phenomenal. I love the fact that he is a good person. He's a good man trying to do his job in really difficult situations. And some people find that boring, but I don't. I really, really like that. And this one, I found this one fascinating because he is taken out of his comfortable situation, and yet not really. So it's set in Paris. He goes to visit, him and his wife go to visit their children who now live in Paris. Their daughter Annie is about to give birth, and so they go there for a visit. The thing is, it's not completely out of his comfort zone because he has spent a lot of time in Paris. His grandmother has an apartment there that he inherited, so they don't even have to stay in a hotel, they stay in that apartment. So he spent a lot of time there. His godfather, who does live in Canada, also has an apartment in Paris and also has spent a lot of time there. So it's not his home, but it is a place that he is fairly comfortable with, and he knows really well. But he is not, he doesn't have any jurisdiction. So he does investigate, but he does it without any of the safeties that he has at home. He is completely out of his jurisdiction. So everybody is going out for a meal, including his godfather Stephen, and as they're walking back after the meal, his godfather Stephen gets hit by a car. It's a hit and run accident, and that sets off the chain of events that happens in the story. And so I really liked that this one, you still got him investigating, because to see him as an investigator and how that works is so fascinating. And you see him working with Jean-Guy again, and when Jean-Guy moved to Paris at the end of the last book, you kind of were like, oh, that's too bad, because I really like the two of them working together. And so because this one is set in Paris, you do get that. They get to work together. I love the focus on his family in this book. You get a lot of interactions between the family members. You learn a lot more about his family. It's a very personal case for him, and I really loved it. I did. I completely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I love her writing. I love Armand Gamache as a character. I loved that it was set in Paris, and I loved that you got so much more about his family, that it was a very personal case. So there you have it. That is what I have been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? I would love to chat with you about them in the comment section down below. Also, for those of you who read mystery series, especially longer ones like the Armand Gamache series, do you find that you get bored with a character in a really long series? And if you do, let me know which series you're thinking of, because now that I'm thinking about it, I've been trying to think back and think if that's ever been the case for me, that I have gotten bored with a character in a really long series, and I don't think that I have, but I could see why you might. So let me know in the comment section down below if you've ever just found yourself have gotten really bored of a character because a series because the series has just gone on for so long. And I will see you for another video soon. Bye.